Hi everyone, happy Pride Month, and for this month I will be explaining how I realize I am a member of one of the most marginalized communities in the world. So for as long as I could remember, I was both called and identified as a tomboy. Growing up, I really loved to play in dirt. I loved rough and tumble play. I really enjoyed going out into nature and climbing up trees and, catching insects and being really engaged, with nature and life around me. Um, that was great, and that worked very, very well up until about the fourth grade. So I was maybe 9 years old when every single one of my male friends, a majority of my friends, suddenly refused to talk to me. They refused to hang out with me. They refused to really have anything to do with me because that was about the age that it became unacceptable for them to lose, in King of the Hill to a girl. So after that, my friend group radically shifted. Instead of rolling, down the hill, I would play Foursquare and, I would talk about boys and things like that, makeup. I just didn't really relate to what was seen as the feminine experience around me. Once we began sort of exploring our identities, getting crushes. My first crush I had when I was 4 years old. But I remember no one ever really found me to be the attractive one. I was never, for the most part, seen as what was, normal or societally attractive. So I kind of hoped that I could maybe become a little bit more feminine. I struggled with my hair. It was very much not the standards of my mostly white peers. I was awkward as any teenager or any preteen, tends to be. And I did not have boobs. I hoped at one point in my life, actually, that, I would suddenly grow these amazing breasts, and then with that would come all of the femininity that I was lacking. I would look good in the dresses and all of these other things that I hoped might make me a little bit more, attractive to my peers and attractive to myself. Um, and that day, it never really came. Um, Both for, the great manifestation of my chest and all of that femininity. I discovered that being transgender was a thing when I was 16. And as soon as I discovered it was a thing, I knew that this was me. I could relate to it deeply and intensely. The experience of growing up as a transgender child and then, preteen and teenager is surreal. It's absolutely surreal. I remember looking at myself in the mirror and feeling nothing. I would look at the mirror and I would see someone looking back at me, but that person wasn't me. it was another person. I didn't think this person was like ugly or not ugly. It was just when I looked at the mirror, I had nothing. And I remember hearing one of my female peers saying that, she wished she was a boy. And this came up in, the context of a patriarchal society. At the time, what she had meant was like, oh, I think my life would be easier if, I was held to the same standards as, men that I see around me. But when I heard that, I was like, oh my God, yeah, no, me too. Like, I wish I was a boy. I remember as a teen consuming as much as I could, finding this like media with gay men and just, gay masculinity. I was very, very drawn to that, but I didn't really know or understand why until, I discovered the transgender community. And the reason that I was able to do this, after I heard my friends saying this, I'm like, oh yeah, no, me too. So I thought it was normal. I thought that like everybody kind of feels the way that I do. They go through that body dysphoria, all of that. And I thought that this was just like the natural state of like being a girl or a woman in a patriarchal society. However, when I found communities online of individuals who were transgender, at the time, you really only heard about MTF and FTM, transgender. There was a beginning where you were one gender or one sex, and then you went through a series of processes, a transition, and then you transitioned to the other gender. It was like one way, one like path, destination. However, I instantly knew. I knew that I wanted that from the moment I found out about it. So I went and I did a lot of research. I did a lot of research online about transgender people, what the process is like for your body, what that means, whether that's permanent or not permanent, just being informed about your body. I went on this journey when I was about 16 years old. And I heard that the first step really was to get counseling to make sure that I was trans enough. There was definitely no easy access to immediate transgender healthcare, despite the fact that I live in Illinois, which is a state that overall is pretty good about trans healthcare and care, having at least some access available. So I went to see a counselor who was a licensed clinical social worker. Absolutely an awful, terrible man. He was incredibly condescending to me. He would never ever talk about my gender issues. He didn't ask me a lot of questions, but he would kind of like ask my father, like, oh, why is hair like that? Like, in many like different, because as part of my journey, one day I started wearing a wig, which, if you're familiar with any kind of textured hair, is incredibly common. If you are even a little bit spicy, right, you know this, but this guy had no spice. He had no awareness like that. So I had to fight with this person who was constantly demeaning me and trying to make my therapy sessions basically focus on my relationship with my father, which was also going through a period of stress because I wanted to transition. Right then, at the age of 16, I knew very clearly that this is what I wanted in my life. It turns out that I didn't start hormones until 2 years later when I was 18. And when I started hormones, a great deal of my depression vanished. Social situations were immediately much easier for me. I began to appreciate the way that I was perceived in society. I felt affirmed. So many problems that I had that as a young, as a young teenager made me feel as though things would never improve, that they would never get better, and that the world was better off without me because I was just tired of suffering. All of those things that I felt intensely and deeply as a child left when I got access to the gender affirming care that I needed. That is what happened. Had I gone on testosterone slightly earlier than I did, I might be taller. I might also have other physical effects that, could have been mine in my body naturally. Like, every single person on the planet has hormones in their bodies. We're trying to pretend that these are some crazy, wild, unknown drugs. They are hormones. And had I gone on hormone replacement therapy earlier, I could have had changes that could have given me even more joy to live in the body that I have. But that right was denied to me. And so eventually when I was 18, I was able to start testosterone, which is part of medically transitioning. At present, I feel that I have transitioned. I am post-transition. From the age of 16, I identified as a transgender man. And for a whole decade after that, that same identification continued until I finally understood enough about non-binary people and the non-binary identity so that I finally was drawn into that after being a trans man for about a decade. I was finally able to step back and explore again what gender meant to me. And I still identify as transmasculine. I generally tell people I'm transmasculine, non-binary. If I identify with a side or a spectrum more, it's generally a masculine feeling. However, I also, when I studied gender and sociology and history and psychology and human development, I realized how subjective gender has been, over different places and times, and how the systems of gender have been used to enforce situations that I do not believe support equality on individuals. So I have decided to opt out of that gender system. I'm not going to rigidly say that, I'm one thing or the other, because I believe that gender is and always has been a spectrum. There have been so many transgender people over, throughout the course of history, and they have been cogent, cognizant, intelligent people. I want to make the point that just because you haven't had an experience and you don't personally understand the experience that someone else is going through, that doesn't mean that they are crazy. It doesn't mean that they have some sort of pathological issue. It just means that, like every person on the planet, they are going to have a different experience from you. Everyone's body is a little bit different. Additionally, I have aphantasia. So when I close my eyes, I cannot picture anything. I see basically whatever light, might still be coming through my eyelids. I can see that. Or if I was looking at light for a long period of time, I can see those, but I cannot visualize anything. And for the longest time in my life, I was so confused whenever people told me to visualize something. I remember being 5 years old and just lying down on bed trying to figure out if people saying to visualize things was metaphorical before I even understood what metaphors were, or if I was just really, really bad at visualizing things. But it turns out that like a small percentage of the population, when I close my eyes, I do not visualize things, and I cannot visualize things. And that was just what I thought was normal for a very long time, until I met someone else with aphantasia who, broadened my perspective. So I could not imagine, people having an experience different from mine, but that didn't mean that they hadn't been having one literally their whole lives, and also my life, without me knowing and understanding it. So I guess then my message this Pride Month is to hold space and understanding. Just because you do not understand and resonate with a certain point of view or perspective doesn't mean that that perspective isn't real or valid, or that the person who holds it is inherently flawed, rather than just inherently different. Difference is beautiful. If every single flower were the same color, if different colors didn't exist, if we were all the same person, just saying the same thing all the time, life on this planet would be so much less dynamic and interesting. So I want to say that if you're a little bit different, that's great. Everybody is. And that variance is what helps make the planet so interesting, flavorful, beautiful. And for trans youth, I know that I know that it is so hard to keep going and to keep exploring and being you and being genuine and moving against a system that no one else questions. I want to say how strong you are, and that it can and absolutely will get better. You will find people that love and affirm you, and that celebrate you for the unique ray of light on this planet that you are. You can find hobbies and interests, and you can make things that the world has never seen before. Your experience is beautiful and valid and wonderful, and this Pride Month, I celebrate it. I celebrate you. LGBTQIA community, whether you're out or not, I celebrate this planet having that difference and that variety and that richness and that beauty that I am thankful